evolution of the industry has changed to where record keeping is tremendously more important.
Made a new rule and everybody had to start keeping records.
Everything's documented.
Now this particular section is going to be leveraging data for continuous improvement. How many people are familiar with lean? Okay. The first things people think about lean is getting rid of waste and different things, but it's more than that. It's developed from TPS, the Toyota Production System. It's really about customer value more than anything else, and recognizing what the customer values from your organization. And that's the important part of lean, because when you start looking at it from that point of view, you start looking at things, how you do things differently. Because if it's not associated something the customer values, why are you doing it? And that's the real point of lean. It's very simple, and I got three great experts that's going to explain them things to you. Jeremy Marquardt from PNW National Laboratory, Angel Reyes from Underwood, and John Cooper from Results Washington. What happens with lean, what you'll find out is a couple of basic principles. And one of them is lean is very visual. It's making work visual. And it's, you really need to do that for the workers, for the workforce. And once you standardize work, it's visual and they see what they're supposed to do, you really have happier employees. And I think, Angel, you could probably address that a little bit, is that it's not when work became standardized, it wasn't something that they felt like they were, fit in and they had to do something, did they?
No, the employees, what we noticed was that, although they were very involved, they wanted to see how they were doing and what areas needed improvement. And so by providing the visuals, not only for performance, but also for their work area, it made it a whole lot easier for them to do their job. And therefore, them, in a packer's case, pack more fruit and, eventually at the end of the day, make more money for them as well. And for us as a warehouse, that means more production with the same person, same time frame as usual. Just reduce the costs and improve the production. So.
Jeremy, how did standardized work, you talk about, how does that shift into PDCA or Plan, Do, Check, Act and continuous improvement?
Yeah, let me address one more thing before that, though. Standardized work or standard work is not something that is given from up on high. It's actually something developed by the people, with the people. So it's not something that surprises them. And it is extremely rigid, but very flexible. It seems like a contradiction. You walk in and you say, this is the way we do the work. It's these 5 steps, except for this is the best way we know how to currently do it. If you find that we can get rid of a step, we are completely flexible and we want to embrace that, and we will try some things to do that. So it's not something that is created in a marble tablet and given from on high, and this is the way you're going to do it forever. It's our current best known way to do things. And so how that plays into PDCA is once you have a repeatable cycle, you say these are the 5 steps we do, we can measure that, and that's where the data comes in, so we can understand that this is currently, there's actually data that backs up why this is the current best way to do this. And as you look at that and you understand, hey, step number 3, I think we could do that better, you actually start creating experiments and trying to address step number 3. So if step number 3 is a washing, and you're washing it through 3 different things, and you think, hey, if we only did 2, I think we would actually meet the requirement and we could remove that work. Well, let's do some experiments, let's do some testing, let's look at some data and see if that is the case. Then you go back and update the standard work, and that becomes the new standard.
And touching on that, a good example would be at one of our company orchards, we had an employee, because they're so far away from the spray company, we had an employee who would stay after work till sometimes about 9:30 at night, waiting for the spray guy to deliver the spray so we can let him into the shed to put the chemicals in. So all this time after 4:30, 5 o'clock was all overtime. Sometimes he'd leave home to Kennewick, he lived in Kennewick, and then drove back to Prosser. So what we decided was give the spray guy a key to the pesticide shed. And so whenever he had time, he could just show up and drop it off. He obviously signed paperwork, for liability purposes. But that reduced so much overtime hours on that employee just hanging around pretty much at the office waiting for the spray guy to show up. Cut back on costs. He wasn't too happy, of course, but that's going to happen. But it saves the company time, especially overtime.
I wanted to touch upon, both of you touched upon TWI and training within industry. Does anybody recognize who that is? That's where TWI started from. It was the way that we trained a temporary workforce in World War II to replace all the GIs that went overseas. And that was the basis of the Toyota production system, okay, and how they've trained their employees through the years. And TWI has kind of been reinvigorated over, the last few years, and being used, especially because there is more shorter-term employees, seasonal workforces, and it's a system. Can anybody add, has TWI influenced Results Washington?
Yes, and we're actively pursuing TWI as one of our strategies to kind of improve our workforce and help them understand their job better. What we've found, and we're kind of learning from Starbucks on this, we hired a lean enterprise consultant from Starbucks who worked heavily with them on adapting TWI to Starbucks, and they got some pretty amazing results. So they basically introduced it into their stores, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, and they found they reduced coffee waste in their stores by about 50% by using TWI, and then they found customer satisfaction went up by about 20% simultaneously. So their employees knowing what to expect, how to do their job and properly do their job, had a massive benefit to their bottom line, and actually, from what they found, made their employees happier too, because they had this better understanding of what was expected and why they were doing what they were doing. So we're training a bunch of people on it, and we're not there yet, and we're trying to get TWI integrated into state government, but we're trying to learn from others before us who have found it to be very, very successful.
Angel, would you like to add anything about TWI?
Yeah, what we found especially was, like I touched on earlier, was for our supervisors. We and I'm sure you guys are aware of this, but our workforce, at least our workforce, a lot of them have very personal relationships just amongst each other. And it's really hard to separate personal from work. And if you try to correct somebody, at work, it's probably going to fall into the whole personal aspect of it. So we had a lot of training on how to separate the personal from the professional. It's helped a lot. It has reduced the time people have spent actually correcting behaviors. It has improved the chain of command, if you will. Instead of somebody going straight to the office, they'll follow the actual, chain of custody that's in place. Go to your supervisor first and take care of situations that way. It's very challenging when, like I said, when you have so many different people involved, but it has helped. It has standardized a lot of things, and I think only time will tell, but it's been good so far.
And one of the pillars of lean is respect for people. And so one of the ways you can show respect for people is for them to actually understand what their job is, how they should do it, and what success looks like. And so TWI and JI are ways to do that, standardized work. So you give your employee a good understanding of what is expected of them, what success looks like, how they should do their job, and then you give them the ownership of that procedure and process so that they can improve it as they go.
One of the things Jeremy talked about was just, picking an apple with the left hand and how you go about that to create standard work and putting the different points of how to do that, how to stand on a ladder. And that's where TWI influences, training so much, is that you will go particular points, you'll bring out particular points of what you have to do. Maybe you have to be at least, on the third step or put pressure on your left foot. You really narrow down what work is and how to explain it. And then you actually supervisor training. When a supervisor comes to help with work, it's not corrective action so much as is he sits back and he observes and he learns. And he learns from the person doing the work, and they collaborate and do it together to improve the process. And it's lean is just an attitude change, because you really become a learning environment as a company. And TWI is a very structured approach to be able to achieve that all the way down the ladder and up the ladder. And up the ladder is, is the part that really needs to change to be able to do that. Another slide I just wanted to put up there, because what's this all got to do with data, right? We're sitting there talking about the collision of ag and data. When we look at lean and we look at some of the ways that to improve a process, we start looking at that PDCA cycle to improve it. And that natural iterative process, if you put that into your production, whether it's in an orchard, whether it's at a packer facility, and you have the sales desk communicating with the grower through the processor, and you have data being transferred, and you do that 6 months out with a forecast, 3 months out, 6 weeks out, all the way to what's on the truck, to the shipping dock. If that information is being transferred, you move from a strategic to a tactical level. And, I'm going to pick on Angel since he's a processor here, but with that type of information, Angel, what would that do to would that, help your processing facility?
I think it would, yeah. I think it would be more in the quality control department, but I think having an understanding of, going back to traceability, somebody mentioned earlier, you want to be able to know what you packed, when you packed it. You have that information, but having all this other data would be very helpful. Just knowing when you can ship it or when it was packed, I guess. Just having all that information readily available would be very, very good, very efficient.
This corollary to that would be something like Amazon tracking unfulfilled requests. So if Amazon didn't have a red beach ball and they got 1 million requests for a beach ball, do you think 2 weeks later they would have a red beach ball in their stores? So as we start to look at even requests coming into the system, can we start to use that to predict what our output should be for the next year?
So when we're getting drilled down with PHI and MRLs, we could actually be transferring that out, forecasting out, sitting and tying that back to the grower and what's being sprayed on the fruit and what that. And this is taking that information and putting it a little bit differently. Because if you have data where, let's say for cherries, for apples, for pears, you can be looking at the grade, the quality, the compliance, of that fruit all the way through the cycle. You can forecast based on last year's data, your assumptions, and then move forward, as you go down and get closer to when you're actually doing the work. But with lean, that process isn't really done that. The most important part of lean and what lean is lessons learned on the end. Is taking the time and taking a breath and reflecting on the process of what happened. And I think, in lean terms, we throw these Japanese terms out there like Hansei and things on it, but that's reflection. And is there any comments on reflecting on a process or what that does for you?
I'm excited about Scout because I work a lot with the field guys in predicting or forecasting harvest dates, but then we also have to look at the PHIs and when they expire. And so having a program, I think, like APREX, being able to plug in potential harvest dates will raise all these red flags, if any, and also having the understanding with the grower as far as what to spray and when to spray, target markets being involved. I'm really excited about that part of it, but I think it would make a lot of streamline a lot of efficiencies.
Does this look to everybody that's difficult to do to be able to, look at this from back, at the start of the year and what you expect, the expectations of making that visual to the staff? Is there any value in this step-by-step process?
Joe, I think there's a lot of value to that, and I think there's many people in the room that are already following this process, looking at last year's results and where do we take them next year, but they're still trapped in paper, right? And they're disparate spreadsheets around. So what I'm excited about Lean, and I'm still a student of Lean, or I can't even call myself that, but I'm excited for the potential of Lean, is because it shows me a clear path to where we could be better at making more efficient decisions and streamline this process. We got a lot of information to move through our company. And how can we process that efficiently? How can we, respect our people and empower them with the tools to be successful in their jobs and make these kinds of decisions? That's a difficult path to look at harvest call quality and volume and tabulate it against market compliance reports and MRL and PHI and all of these things. And it's people that have to do it. And so what excites me about Lean in this discussion is that there's a process and a system that's demonstrated to work across industries that maybe help make that a little more manageable and efficient.
Yeah, one of the things I meant to say up front is, and to steal from Paul Akers, is Lean is simple. So you probably heard things and you go, yeah, of course, right? It's not complicated. It's just being mindful and it's spending the time to look at the data and ask yourself, what can we do to make ourselves better? And it's basically just vigilance. Keeping after it, being mindful, and looking at your data and asking how can we improve. It's not rocket science. It's not super complicated. It's actually very simple.
Yeah, it's kind of like getting out of the office, and you learn by doing.
Exactly. Yep.
Now, I've kind of converted a 6S thing to data. All right, and you'll see people talk about 5S and the 6S has become safety. Okay, on it. But when I converted it and tried to put it in a data sense, it's, you need to sort your data. You need to set it in order, okay, to be able to use it. And shine is, you got to make it usable. You got to make sure it looks pretty and it flows well, okay. Security, you want security. And then you have to standardize it for people to use it. It can't be a different, it's one of these things that you have different forms from different departments flowing that are totally different to people. People don't want to figure out how to use the form. They want to look at the information in the form. That's where the action occurs and people are able to process it. And then you have to sustain it, okay? And that's the difficult part. Have you used 5S in your facilities?
Yeah, we use it all the time. This past cherry harvest, we got a new line. We had trouble. Our people have a tendency to overproduce inventory, like to boxes, when the machine can keep up just fine, but it's that whole just in case mentality. Just in case the machine breaks down, just in case the line runs faster, just in case anything. So they will overproduce and then they run out of room to literally walk around. And so we had to do this 5S or 6S now in literally just making boxes. And how do you prep a box from just getting it down from the chute to lining it as you need it? You just work so hard and, build up stacks and stacks on the ground, which leads into food safety issues, knocking them over on the ground, no cardboard, no pallet, etc., all these other things. But 5S'ing that area not only was a challenge itself because of the people lining the boxes, but the people actually making the boxes on the mezzanine, because they were just feeding the machine like if they were being paid on commission or something, and so we had to figure out, no, this machine, through various cycle times, this machine can make a box every 22 seconds, so the box gets filled every 28 seconds, so you have so many seconds left over. And just through cycle times like that is when you figure out, okay, you work smarter, not harder. But 5S'ing was key, especially when you even ordering all this extra shook for cherry harvest, where you can't really exactly predict it,
But in that, overproduction is actually one of the worst types of waste, because it actually is all the other waste as well, because you have to transport those boxes around, you have to store them, you have to manage them, and it actually hides all of your problems. the excess inventory actually buffers, and so you actually lose all many of your improvement opportunities because you can't see them. Because now you've got a buffer of inventory, you can't see that if I ran out of inventory, I won't see that problem, because now I have 3 years worth of boxes stacked up behind the process. As far as your 6 S's here, the shine one, that might be an interesting one in this, as far as taking a set of data and correlating it with another set of data, so that then you start to understand if we had this type of weather and I sprayed this and we did this and we did this, and you start to put all those together, then you start to be able to make decisions, which is basically what you were talking about before, not necessarily the format, but how do you get data so that you can actually make meaningful decisions from it.
The one thing that I wanted to touch upon on lean before we left this conversation is that we think of lean as incremental improvement. We think of standardized, then we PDCA it, which is continuous improvement. We improve upon the process. There's really a new form of lean that's developed recently, and it's more predictive. As I put up there, SDCA, and that's what puts food on the table, our standard work. PDCA is literally just going to improve on a certain section of it at a time. But the other process, see the slide got a little messy there. It should be EDCA, should be on that shopping cart on the right there. And what that is more of a design thinking, a lean startup mentality. Has anybody ever heard of lean startup? Ah, there's a couple back here. But that was, but what that is more of a experimental or reactive, where you're doing customer development and you're doing a smaller iterative process. And why is that important now is because a few of the things. Prototyping is cheaper, okay, for one. And Jeremy, can you touch upon the lean startup a little bit for me?
Yeah, sure. That comes from Steve Blank, and Eric Rees actually wrote the book. But the basic premise of the book is, how do you get to market fastest with what they call a minimum viable product? So in the software world, which is where I come from, rather than creating, let's take Excel. How many functions are in Excel? Thousands, right? How many do you use? 10, right? Right? I mean, so if you were producing Excel for the first time, rather than producing the 10,000 features and 10 years later releasing it, how do you release it so you can have cells and you can do basic math and calculations so that you can get it in the hands of customers so they can start using it and realize, hey, you know what, I need a function that does standard deviation. I need a function that does averages. And that actually drives your production schedule, because then you start to develop the things that people care about first. So now you get feedback early and you start to actually build the things that your customers care about, rather than one big push of 10,000 features that most, 95% of them nobody ever uses. So the lean startup is all about that quick iteration. How do you quickly get to market, quickly get feedback, and quickly make sure you're building what your customer cares about?
I think it's a great explanation of it. Is there anybody who would like to add to that? I thought you might, Britt. I thought you'd get a great description on the phone the other day of it.
Put me on the spot a little bit here. One of the things that I've kind of learned from this whole lean startup mentality is not only just the minimum viable product and listening to the customer base, but also understanding that sometimes what the customer thinks they want isn't actually exactly what they want. And they call that in the lean startup as A/B testing. You put out a product that has 2 different versions of it, and you try to react to what the customer says they would like to have, but you do it in 2 different ways, and then you track how they use those different versions and which one is either working better for them or gets more use. And in that way, you can really actually dig down to the actual need of the customer versus what they thought they might have needed. And so it even goes beyond just listening to the customer and what their desires are. It's actually trying to get down to the root of what they really need. And so that's the other side of the lean startup that hasn't really been talked about, but is very integral into the whole minimum viable product, the whole build, measure, learn loop to come back around and continually improve the product so that you're serving the needs of the customers on a level that they might not have even known that they needed to have serviced and so forth. So that's just another aspect of the lean startup.
Well, I'd like to thank the panelists very much. I think you added some great insight, and we'll take a break now, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes.